My name is Marlon, and this is the moment when I realized that my fabulous marriage was just a brilliant illusion. Behind the exquisite shell, expertly created by Graham, there was an emptiness that I had been trying to ignore for so long. 5 years ago, when I first met him at the gala charity party, he made a stunning impression on me. Graham was the embodiment of all my dreams: successful, charismatic, confident. His attention on me was like a ray of sunlight coming out of the shadows. Then I thought it was fate. His courtship was dizzying: expensive restaurants, flowers every week, trips to the coast that seemed like pages from a romantic novel. We got married, and he whispered to me on our wedding night, "You'll never need anything. I'll take care of everything." His words sounded like a promise of love, but they became shackles. Our house was perfectly designed, attention was paid to every detail. Cars, travel, jewelry, all this was supposed to symbolize an ideal life. But as time went on, I began to notice that behind each gift there were threads that held me in subjection. "Marlene, darling, don't be dramatic, you have a wonderful life here," his voice, steeped in condescension, echoed in my head as I stood in the kitchen. The kitchen was his pride, equipped with the most modern appliances, but it became a prison for me. On these countertops, I spent hours cooking dishes that met Graham's strict standards. "It's the least you can do for this family," he repeated when I dared to complain. The word family always hurt. We didn't have any children of our own. The only child was Dustin, Graham's son from his first marriage. When he moved in with us, he was a polite teenager, but over time he began to absorb his father's cold arrogance. That day, he came into the kitchen just at the moment of our quarrel. "What's going on? Why are you yelling at Dad?" he asked with an expression that left no room for doubt. He had already chosen a side. "Nothing, son. Marlon is just going through one of her moments," Graham said, not even deigning to look at me. Dustin snorted. "Maybe if she was doing something with her life instead of spending your money, she wouldn't be so unhappy." These words turned out to be the last straw. I grabbed my purse and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" came Graham's voice, full of annoyance. "I need to get out," I said without turning my head. "Don't be ridiculous. Dinner should be ready by 7, he chuckled. For a moment, I felt the familiar urge to obey, to return to an obedient role. But something inside me flared up. The spark, long extinguished, came to life. "Make yourself a damn dinner," I said, slamming the door behind me. Later, standing in front of the ATM screen and seeing the inscription, "Insufficient funds," I felt the cold breath of reality. Graham has denied me access to our money again. It wasn't the first time. Pictures of humiliation and limitations were building up in my mind one after another. When I got home, I found him in his office. His calmness and preoccupation with business papers only fueled my anger. "Graham, did you transfer money from our joint account?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. He barely looked up from the papers spread out on his massive oak desk. "I had business expenses," he said casually. "But why couldn't I withdraw cash today? I thought we had an agreement." "Agreed?" Graham interrupted me with mild annoyance. "Marlon, you know, I'm in charge of finance. You don't have to worry about that." "But it's our money," I continued, feeling myself snap. Graham laughed, and his laugh sounded like an icy prick. "Our money?" he repeated with a venomous sneer. "I earn it, Marlon. You're wasting it. Don't pretend to understand how our budget works." This careless cruelty paralyzed me. I froze in place, as if struck by lightning, before I could turn around and leave the office. The kitchen, which had seemed like a refuge to me before, turned into a place where I mechanically began to cook dinner. Against the background of the sounds of slicing vegetables, I heard Dustin's footsteps. He was lazily talking on the phone, casually flipping through something in his hands. "Hey, Marlon, what's for dinner?" "What is it?" he asked, not even taking his eyes off the screen. "Chicken with Parmesan," I replied, trying to find at least some stability in the usual routine. "Cool. And by the way, I need $500 for a new game console," he said as if it were not a request, but a demand. I hesitated. Dustin, I don't think. Oh, come on, he interrupted me. It's not like you guys can't afford it. Dad always says you're just a housewife. What else are you going to spend the money on? The knife I was holding in my hand clattered onto the countertop. What did you just say? I asked, looking at him with an expression that probably made him feel uncomfortable for the first time. He rolled his eyes. Relax. I'm just saying that you don't contribute anything except, well, you get it. Something inside me broke, and I felt anger rising in a wave, overwhelming me. Get out of the kitchen, I said, in a cold tone that seemed to overwhelm him. That night, while Graham was praising Dustin's latest school achievement at dinner, ignoring me, I was lying in my bed, staring at the ceiling. How did I allow myself to become so dependent? How did I, once a confident woman, end up in a trap created not only by Graham, but also by myself? The next morning, while Graham was at work and Dustin was at school, I took an old laptop out of a dusty box in the pantry. My hands were shaking when I created a blog that I called The Invisible Wife. The words flowed like a river bursting a dam. Everything that I had been holding in for years, pain, humiliation, disappointment, was spilled out in the texts. Post after post, I described years of financial control, emotional manipulation, and the loss of my identity. Each click on the publish button brought a strange feeling of freedom, a tiny spark of hope. The hope that I can still be heard. They had no idea that I had started, and at the moment it was exactly what I wanted. The soft glow of my laptop screen spread across the dark kitchen as I furiously typed in another blog post. 3 months have passed since the launch of The Invisible Wife, and the reaction has been truly overwhelming. You gave me the courage to speak out, I read a comment from a user with the nickname HopefulHeart23. I'm not alone anymore. Tears welled up in my eyes as I scrolled through similar messages, each of which filled me with the feeling that I was doing something meaningful. My fingers froze over the keyboard, ready to answer, when suddenly I heard footsteps approaching. I slammed the laptop shut a moment later as soon as Graham entered the kitchen. His gaze was suspicious. What are you doing so late? What is it? He asked, clearly on guard. I couldn't sleep, I replied calmly. I was just reading something. He snorted, not showing much interest. Well, don't forget that the Johnsons are coming to dinner tomorrow. I expect everything to be perfect, he called over his shoulder before heading upstairs. When his footsteps faded, I exhaled, feeling the tension slowly release me. The constant fear of being exposed was exhausting, but the purpose my blog gave me justified the risk. The next morning, while preparing for a dinner party, I heard my phone vibrate. It was a notification. My last post went viral. It has been shared thousands of times on social media, and my blog has been the center of attention. Marlon. Graham called sharply from the next room. His voice interrupted my joy. Where's my blue tie? The one I told you to take to the dry cleaners. It's hanging in your closet, where I left it yesterday, I replied, holding back my irritation. He muttered something and left, and I went back to the phone. My heart started beating faster when I saw an email from a popular women's magazine. They wanted to interview me about my blog. In the evening, when the guests gathered at the table, the conversations were formal, strained, and I tried not to betray my excitement. During dessert, Mrs. Johnson turned to me with a smile. Marlene, what do you do? Do you have any hobbies? I opened my mouth to reply, but Graham interrupted me, grinning. Oh, Marlene is happy with her role as a housewife, isn't she, dear? Something inside me flared up. Actually, I began, trying to stay calm, I recently started writing. It turned out to be very exciting. Graham froze. His fork clattered on his plate. Right? What is it? He asked through clenched teeth. And about what? About life experience, I replied vaguely, feeling my heart pounding. Later, when the guests had left and Graham had retired to his office, I opened my laptop again. The magazine wanted to conduct an interview the very next day. I quickly typed in consent, sent the letter with trembling fingers and felt a surge of delight and fear. The next morning, under the pretext of running errands, I went to a small cafe on the other side of the city. Interviewer Sarah turned out to be warm and supportive. "Your blog has resonated with so many women," she said. "What does it feel like to have such influence?" I took a deep breath. To be honest, it scares and gives strength at the same time. For a long time, I felt invisible, silent. I'm part of the community now. We support each other, share stories. It's liberating. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders for the first time in many years. I was seen as Marlene, not just Graham's wife or Dustin's stepmother, but as a person with thoughts and dreams. Sarah's last question, "What happens next with the invisible wife?" caught me off guard. I paused, considering my answer. "I'm not sure yet," I said, feeling my inner doubts collide with my newfound determination. "But I know one thing, I can't be silent again. This blog, this community, has given me a purpose that I didn't even know I had until I started writing." On the way home, my mind raced in search of opportunities. An article in the magazine could attract even more attention to the blog, help more women find their voices. Or maybe I myself will finally find the strength to make real changes in my life. I turned into the driveway, already preparing for another confrontation with Graham and Dustin. But this time there was no habitual fear. Instead, I felt a glimmer of hope. The seeds of resilience sown in recent months have begun to sprout. The annual Thompson family holiday was in full swing. The laughter of the guests mixed with the aroma of roast meat, filling the backyard. I forced a smile, playing the role of the perfect hostess, while anxiety and tension bubbled inside me. "Marlene, darling." My mother-in-law's shrill voice tore through my thoughts. "Where's the potato salad you promised?" I hurried into the kitchen, grateful for the momentary respite. Opening the refrigerator, I stopped for a moment, meeting my reflection in the window glass. The woman looking at me looked tired and defeated. At that moment, I desperately wanted to support her. My mom, Evelyn, appeared in the kitchen doorway, her face reflecting concern. "I'm fine, Mom," I lied, picking up the bowl. The words were hard to come by as I tried to suppress the inner chaos. "Are you sure?" she began, but was interrupted by Graham's loud voice. "Marlon, where's the damn salad?" he shouted from the patio. I hurried outside, almost colliding with Dustin, who grinned and deliberately pushed me with his shoulder. The bowl in my hand swayed, and part of the potato salad ended up on my blouse. "Dude, Marlon," he snorted, giving me a scornful look. "Is there anything you can do right?" I bit my tongue not to answer, fighting back tears. As I put the bowl on the table, I heard Graham say irritably, "For God's sake, Marlon." He looked down at my stained shirt with obvious disgust. "Go change, you're embarrassing me." As I turned to leave, my gaze met my mother's eyes. The pity in her gaze was almost unbearable. Closing the bathroom door behind me, I leaned against the wall and tried to calm my breathing. The phone vibrated in my pocket. A new comment on my blog. "You're stronger than you think. Don't let them dim your light." These words, like a breath of fresh air, gave me strength. I changed my shirt and went back to the party. But as soon as I stepped out into the yard, my footsteps stopped. Graham was talking to one of the guests, not noticing my presence. "I do not know how you do it," said his son-in-law, nodding in my direction. "Successful business, the ability to handle people, and at the same time, well, you know." Graham grinned without even looking at me. "Oh, Marlon. She's harmless. Housewife. It is useful just enough to know your place." The world seemed to tilt around me. The men were laughing, and Dustin joined them, eager for his father's approval. "Yes, all she does is mope around the house and spend her father's money," Dustin added with disdain. Total dead weight. Something inside me has broken. Years of suppressed anger, frustration, and humiliation came out with a force I couldn't resist. Before I realized what I was doing, I went straight to the group, leaving my usual mask somewhere behind. Is that what you really think of me, Graham? My voice was even, but it was bubbling inside. Useless housewife? The laughter stopped. Graham turned around, his face flushed with rage. Marlon, he began, trying to keep his composure, this is not the time or the place. No, Graham, I interrupted, not taking my eyes off him. I think this is exactly the time and the place. Do you want to talk about uselessness? Let's talk about a husband who humiliates his wife at every turn, or a stepson who shows no respect. The crowd froze. People looked at each other, whispered something, but no one dared to interfere. Dustin stood with his mouth open, as if he couldn't believe that I dared to speak. That's enough. Graham bellowed, grabbing my arm. You're making a scene. I pulled away from his grip, taking a step back. No, Graham, I said, looking him straight in the eye. You've been making a scene for years. I'm just finally calling you to account. With that, I turned around and walked back to the house, leaving him and the rest of the guests in confused silence. My footsteps echoed in my head, but inside I had a strange feeling of calm. At the porch, I felt a gentle touch on my shoulder. It was my mom, Evelyn. Her eyes shone with a mixture of pride and concern. Oh, honey, she whispered, hugging me. I've been waiting for years for you to finally fight back. Let's get out of here. Without looking back. I nodded, and we headed for her car. As I drove away from the driveway, I looked in the rearview mirror at the still stunned faces of the guests. Along with their houses, their laughter, and their false smiles, I was leaving behind a part of my past. I felt the heaviness that had held me down for so many years begin to dissolve. Where are we going, honey? Evelyn asked, her voice soft but confident. I took a deep breath, feeling a real taste of freedom for the first time. Anywhere, Mom. But not here. A few days later, I was going through the contents of my father's old safe. The smell of musty papers, long forgotten and covered with dust, filled the room. Evelyn was standing next to me, her hand gently resting on my shoulder. I can't believe Dad never told me about this, I muttered, holding a thick envelope in my hands. He wanted to protect you, Mom said with quiet sadness. He knew Graham would try to control it all if he found out. My hands were shaking slightly when I opened the envelope. I found a letter and legal documents inside. My eyes widened as I realized their significance. Mom, I whispered in disbelief, Dad left me everything, the beach house, the investments, even part of the company. That's millions. Evelyn tightened her grip on my shoulder. You deserve it, darling. This is yours. Now you can start all over again, on your own terms. As reality sank into my consciousness, a plan began to form inside me. This money was not only the beginning of a new life, but also a chance for justice. I walked around the room, my mind racing. Graham deserved to know what it was like to be powerless, dependent, disenfranchised. I knew exactly what I needed to do. I spent the next few days carefully planning each step. I consulted with a lawyer to make sure that Graham would not be able to touch a penny of my inheritance. My right to it was protected as strongly as my new outlook on life. I contacted a small publishing house, which has been following my blog for a long time, with a book offer. Their interest turned out to be genuine, and we started discussing the details. At the same time, I was looking for my new place, a house that would become a symbol of my new beginning. During this period, I received dozens of calls and messages from Graham, the full range of his emotions, from anger to despair. But I didn't answer any of them. Let him feel what it feels like to be ignored and lost. It was a week after the disastrous barbecue before I re-entered the house I once thought was mine. Graham was waiting for me in the living room, his face a mask of barely contained rage. Where the hell have you been? He pounced as soon as I opened the door. Do you have any idea how embarrassing it was to explain your tantrum to everyone? I looked up, meeting his gaze with surprising calmness. I've been making plans, I said. Plans? He chuckled. What plans could you make without my money? You'd be surprised, I replied with a smile. For example, plans to leave you, Graham. His face turned purple. You can't leave, Marlon, his voice trembled with anger. You're nothing without me. That's where you're wrong, I said, feeling calm envelop me. I have a blog that is becoming more and more successful. I'm working on a book, and most importantly, I have an inheritance. What inheritance? He hissed, his eyes narrowing. The one my father left me. I enjoyed the shock on his face. You didn't know anything about him, but it turns out I'm worth quite a lot. And you won't get a penny. He rushed towards me, grabbing my arm. You can't do this to me. I made you who you are. I pulled my hand away, looking at him firmly. You tried to destroy me, Graham. But I'm starting to rebuild myself. And it starts right now. I turned to the door, but Dustin was standing in the doorway. His face reflected a mixture of confusion and anger. What's going on? He asked. Dad, what is she saying? I looked at him and felt a pang of pity for the first time. I'm sorry, Dustin, I said softly. I tried to be a good stepmother, but you and your father made it clear that I was never part of this family. Now I choose myself. I went out, leaving them in silence. From the outside, the world seemed unexpectedly bright and spacious to me. The road ahead was full of uncertainty, but for the first time in many years I felt truly free. As I was driving to my new beginning, the phone vibrated. Another comment on my blog. You are an inspiration. Thank you for helping me believe in myself. I smiled, realizing that my journey wasn't just about me. It was the beginning of a movement that hundreds of women were part of, waiting for their chance to show the world their strength. The sleek office buzzed with energy. The Invisible Wife brand has transformed from a modest blog into an entire empire. My team was bustling around preparing for the launch of a new product. Sarah, my finance director, came over with a report. We have exceeded forecasts by 30%, she announced. I smiled, feeling all the parts of my new world coming together. A wave of pride swept over me when I looked at the report confirming the success of our company. Great job. Everyone worked hard, and it was worthy of a celebration. When the team started congratulating me, my phone vibrated. Graham's name flashed on the screen, and for a moment I froze. Should I answer or not? I hesitated, but decided that whatever he wanted, I was no longer afraid. What is it, Graham? My voice was even and professional, even if I knew his desperation was behind it. Marlon, I need your help, he stammered, his voice sounding different this time, not so confident. The company has problems. I made some bad investments, and now I do not know what to do. I shook my head. Do you want me to help you out? I finished his thought without trying to hide the sting in my voice. No, Graham, I'm not going to save you. Please, Marlon, his voice became almost pleading, but I interrupted him. You're right, Graham, it didn't end well. And it's entirely your fault. I hung up the phone, feeling a strange mixture of satisfaction and the fact that I had done exactly what I had to do. Is gone. I gave up this chapter of my life, and now no one could bring me back. But in my heart, I also felt a cold pang of guilt, not because I was cruel, but because part of me was sorry. However, I pushed those feelings aside. I deserve this success, and I'm not going to let Graham drag me down again. Later in the evening, when we were celebrating the success of our company, my phone lit up with an alert again. The news, the headline of which made my heart beat faster: Thomson Industries is facing bankruptcy due to fraud charges. I clutched the phone in my hands, remembering how Graham had always boasted of his success and arrogance, and now it looked like this house had been destroyed. Goodbye, the foundation on which his world stood. I went outside, shocked by the news, to reflect on what had happened. But when I flipped through the article, a name that I hadn't heard for a long time caught my attention. Dustin Thomson. My stepson. It turned out that he was involved in a fraud scheme at his father's company. At that moment, I felt how sorry I felt for him. He seems to have followed his father's footsteps too closely. The next morning, when I arrived at the office, I was greeted by a crowd of reporters. My personal affairs have become public again. The questions rained down like rain. Ms. Thompson, what do you think about your ex-husband's fraudulent actions? How do you react to accusations that your success is based on insider information from Thompson Industries? I took a deep breath, squaring my shoulders. I ended my marriage with Graham Thompson over a year ago. My company, The Invisible Wife, was built from scratch, fueled by the stories and forces of women who refuse to remain silent. I have nothing to do with Thompson Industries or its problems. As I pushed past the reporters, my phone vibrated again. This time it was Dustin. "Marlon, please," his voice was full of desperation. "Dad's in a mess. We need your help, you owe us." I felt a flash of anger. "I don't owe you anything, Dustin," my words sounded harsh and decisive. "You and your father made that clear many years ago. But we are a family." His voice was trembling. "No," I ended the conversation. "We're not a family anymore." When I returned to my office, sat down and looked out the window, my gaze slid over the city skyline, and I felt my inner world begin to build up again. I have risen from the ashes of our toxic marriage, stronger and more resilient than ever. My life was mine. And this success that I achieved was just the beginning of a new path. A knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. Sarah was standing in the doorway with another report, her face serious, almost anxious. "Marlon, you need to see this," she said, not waiting for me to invite her in. "The collapse of the Thompson industry may affect some of our suppliers. We need to act quickly to protect our interests." I nodded, pushing aside all thoughts of Graham and Dustin that seemed to be bothering me. I had my own empire, and I couldn't let external problems overshadow my efforts. I needed to protect what I was building from scratch, based on empowerment, mutual support, and honesty, not manipulation and greed like Graham's. Plunging into crisis management mode, I couldn't help but feel the irony. All the skills that I had honed as an invisible wife, adaptability, resilience, strategic thinking, were now becoming my main tools for doing business in these turbulent times. The day Graham humiliated me by calling me a useless housewife seemed like a lifetime ago to me. I was no longer the person he saw me as. I was a force to be reckoned with, and I was just beginning to realize my power. Suddenly, a sharp knock on my office door brought me out of my concentration. Before I could answer, the door flew open, and Graham and Dustin appeared on the threshold, their faces distorted by a mixture of despair and rage. "Do you have a little courage, Marlon?" Graham growled, rushing to my desk. My heart was pounding, but I forced myself to remain calm, answering firmly. "This is my personal account. You have to leave." Dustin slammed his fist on the table. "Until you give us what we want. You owe me." I repeated his words incredulously. "Are you crazy? I don't owe you anything." Graham narrowed his eyes, his voice became cold and threatening. "We know about your little unexpected success, about your father's legacy." I felt a chill run down my spine. How did they find out about this? How did they know that the money should be ours? Dustin spat on the floor, his face contorted with anger. We laughed bitterly, I said. "Is this what you call a family, after all the years of humiliation, after you treated me like a servant?" Graham came closer to me, his face was almost at point-blank range. He spoke softly, but with a threat. "I made you who you are. All you have is because of me." And then something inside me clicked. Years of pent-up frustration, anger, and pain burst out. "Did you make me?" I was hissing. "Don't, Graham. You tried to break me down, but guess what? I will rise on my own. I have rebuilt myself, my company, my success. It's all mine. And you can't touch it." Graham couldn't help himself, his face turned red, and he yelled. "You're ungrateful. After all I've done for you. I didn't let him finish, but interrupted him, calmly and firmly. Let's talk about what you did, Graham. What about the years of emotional abuse? How about how you controlled me financially? Or should we discuss the fraud allegations hanging over Thompson Industries? There was something like fright in Graham and Dustin's eyes, and then both of them turned pale. I continued without giving them a word. It's true. I know all about it. And unlike you, I built my company honestly, thanks to my talent and hard work. Dustin rushed towards me, but I stayed in my place, not backing down. You're lying, he shouted. You must have stolen insider information from Dad's company. I shook my head, barely able to contain my regret. The boy was entangled in these false stories. But I felt sorry for him. No, I didn't have to steal anything, Dustin. All I have is the result of my own efforts. My success was not accidental. He was the result of my deep understanding of what women like me, invisible wives, silent sufferers, have been through. I gave them a voice, and they answered me, supporting me at every step. I was their reflection, their hope, their strength. Every day I realized more and more that my struggle was not just a personal victory, but also an act of resistance to all those who tried to put us out. When Graham, defeated and desperate, turned to me for help, I felt his bravado crumble. He said, "Marlon, please, we're desperate. The company collapsed, our assets are frozen. We need help." At that moment, I saw a glimpse of the man I once loved, the one with whom I once built dreams. But then I remembered all those years when he ignored my needs, my dreams and desires. I didn't believe him anymore. "I'm sorry you're in trouble," I replied firmly, "but it's not my problem anymore." Dustin, losing his remaining patience, shouted, "What about loyalty?" I met his gaze without looking away. There was no hesitation or doubt in the voice. "Loyalty," I repeated, "goes both ways, Dustin. You and your father made that clear a long time ago. Where was your loyalty?" I saw the despair on Graham's face turn to rage. He spoke threateningly. "Do you regret this, Marlon? We will tell everyone how you betrayed your family, how daring you are." I interrupted him, not letting him finish. "Do you want to talk about betrayal? Then let's talk about the years you spent undermining my self-esteem. How many times have you made me feel useless?" My voice was getting firmer with every word. I was no longer the woman who had once suffered humiliation. Graham and Dustin, devastated and defeated, silently turned to leave, but before leaving the office, Graham stopped. "It's not over yet, Marlon," his words were full of menace. I met his gaze with a challenge he never expected. "Yes, Graham, that's when." I didn't look away. When the door closed behind them, I remained sitting in my chair, consumed by adrenaline. I did it. I stood up to them, refused manipulation and guilt. My phone vibrated and I looked at the screen. A message from my mother. "Is everything all right, dear? You look tense." I smiled, feeling a wave of gratitude for her unwavering support. "It's okay, Mom," I replied. "Actually, it's better than ever." When I looked at the cityscape, I was overcome by a sense of peace. The confrontation with Graham and Dustin was not just a struggle for money or success. It was the last step towards restoring my strength, my voice. I was no longer the invisible wife. I was the CEO of Marlene Thompson and an advocate for women's rights around the world. And I was just getting started. The sun was slowly sinking below the horizon, turning the sky orange and pink. I was standing on the balcony of my villa by the sea, listening to the soothing sound of waves lapping against the rocks. At that moment, my mother's voice sounded from inside. "It's all right, dear." I turned around and saw Evelyn, my loyal support, join me. She squeezed my hand. "Misty, your father would be so proud of you," she said softly but lovingly. The mention of my father caused a bittersweet pain in my heart. His legacy was the catalyst for my new life, but it was my own strength that helped me survive, help myself and many others. As we watched the last rays of sunlight fade together, I knew that the path I had traveled was not easy, but it was the right one. And there was an even bigger fight ahead of me. My phone vibrated again, and I looked at the screen without taking my eyes off the horizon. The news alert caught my attention. Former CEO Graham Thompson has been convicted in a fraud case. I felt my heart skip a beat. Evelyn, noticing the change in my expression, came up to me. "What is it? What is it?" she asked softly. I showed her the article on the screen, and even though I had been preparing for this moment for a long time, some sense of relief still pierced me. "Graham will go to jail too." "Dustin." I began, but I didn't have time to finish. Evelyn was watching me intently, and I felt her words envelop me with a warm light. "How are you feeling?" she asked softly. "It must be difficult." I paused, trying to make sense of this moment. "I guess I'm relieved," I finally said. "But I'm sad for the family we could have been if things had been different." Evelyn nodded, her gaze full of understanding. "You can't change the past, Marlon," she said. "But you have built an incredible future." It was as if an unknown force responded to her words, and suddenly my phone rang again. This time it was a letter from my publishing team. My heart skipped a few beats when I saw the message. "Your book, The Invisible Wife Is No More, has made the New York Times bestseller list." Tears of joy suddenly burst into my eyes when I showed the news to my mother. She hugged me tightly, her pride was palpable as air. "You did it, honey," she said, her voice full of warmth. "You really did it." Later, at dinner, when the women I met through my blog and I were sitting at a communal table, I felt a strange sense of completion that I had never experienced before. Lisa, a former lawyer who left her abusive husband, raised a glass to me. "To Marlene, who gave us all the courage to take back our lives," she said. Everyone supported the toast, and I felt a wave of gratitude sweep over me. I stood up, answering. "No, it's a credit to all of us." My voice was full of emotion. "For supporting each other, for refusing to remain invisible." After dinner, when the others were still chatting and laughing, I slipped into my office. Opening my laptop, I went to my blog, The Invisible Wife. His gaze froze on the new message button. I took a deep breath and started typing. "Dear friends, when I started this blog, I was a shadow of myself, silent, powerless, invisible. Today I stand before you as a best-selling author, a successful entrepreneur, and, most importantly, as a woman who has regained her identity. But this journey wasn't just about me. It concerned all of us, invisible wives, silent sufferers, women who were told that they were nothing without their husbands. We have proved how wrong this idea is. For those still trapped in emotional abuse and control, there is hope. You are stronger than you think, and you are not alone. For those who have already broken free, your perseverance inspires me every day. Keep shining your light, keep telling your stories." When I reached the end of the letter, my fingers froze on the keys. Inspired, I clicked the Publish button. At that moment, I felt a deep satisfaction, a sense of completion, in which the invisible wife was gone forever, giving way to a woman who stood proudly in the light of her achievements. I fully accepted my new life, looking back at my mother, my friends, and the women who became my chosen family. We were bound by an unbreakable bond, and I knew that no matter what challenges the future threw up, we would face them together. The sweet taste of justice has given way to something more powerful, the joy of true independence. It was my happily ever after, hard, but on my own terms. And that was just the beginning.